Okay, guys, so there's not a lot of news today, which is really, really weird. I don't know, maybe I'm missing something, but yeah, it's kind of weird. But we are going to talk about Boris Yeltsin. A lot of the other stuff is just general political noise. But yeah, I might see if I have something else I can make another video or two on. But at the moment, so far today, it's just going to be really about Boris Yeltsin, media blaming Trump for a store spat, and that's about it. So if you know anything for the third item, let me know. I'll also put out a tweet. But let's jump into it. So guys, in case you have not heard, Boris Yeltsin has gone through and has actually won the UK seat for Prime Minister. He is victorious. It is hashtag a new hope. I'm going to start that hashtag because I think it's actually quite relevant. But yeah, Boris is obviously very, very pro-Brexit. And this is something that the Tory party desperately needed because of the current situation with, I was going to say Angela Merkel, Theresa May. They're one and the same, aren't they? But yeah, obviously the problem with Theresa May, she was a Remainer in disguise, wolf in sheep's clothing. She was obviously not that fussed or impressed about giving a Brexit strategy like the UK, the US. Sometimes they just don't have an exit strategy. But like I say, yeah, at the end of the day, she was a wolf in sheep's clothing. So Boris has gone through. He has won the seat for the Prime Minister. And we're going to go through, we're going to cover the news. We're going to talk about how the news is covering it, what's the actual truth of the situation. And then obviously, guys, let me know what your thoughts are in that comment section below. Also, if you do find this video helpful, please smack that like button as well as share it, because we are heavily monetized and censored. Demonetized and censored on this channel. It is actually really, really insane if you can see my analytics. But let's jump into it. So it's all over. The phony war. It's all over. The phony war is finished. The 3 miserable years of Theresa May's pseudo-consultants, deafism spitting into the middle, duplicity and capitulation and surrender is over. It's morning again in the UK, to paraphrase Ronald Reagan, just before the landslide presidential win in 1984. The Brexit denouncement is at hand. Boris Johnson's landslide win in the Conservative leadership contest stands in favourable contrast to that of David Cameron in 2005. A solid 2-1 vote. Specifically, he won an absolute majority of votes, not just for his fellow MPs, but nearly for the 160,000 Conservative Party members. Please pay here to read more. Now, obviously, other people, left-wing, obviously, or the establishment media is obviously losing their shit right now. 99.86% of us didn't have a say on Boris Johnson becoming Prime Minister because he's a Conservative Prime Minister. The leadership contest between Jeremy Hunt and the former London Mayor was decided by 159,000 Tory party members. It's like the party's voting for its own leader. Rather than the general public. Why would the vast general public vote on a Tory leadership? If you want to make the argument that the Tory public should vote on their own leader, I would say that's a good thing. But to me, this just stinks of them basically flipping the table as they walk out, because they know, holy shit, Boris Johnson is going to push for Brexit. And we'll cover some of his statements later. It's not the first time a Prime Minister has been elected without a general election. No, it's not. He's a Tory leader. But many are questioning why a new leader should not be chosen by the 0.14% of Britain's should be chosen by the 0.14% of Britain's population. That in itself is stupid. What do Tories make up? 30% of the population, for example? Roughly 30-40%? Why would you get the vast majority to vote for a minority party's leader? That in itself is like mind-blowingly stupid. But apart from that, if you want to make the argument that the Tories should vote for their own leader, sure, I could probably get behind that. But at the end of the day, you have 160,000 party members. They've overwhelmingly voted for Boris Johnson, and hopefully he'll do a good job. Hopefully. If he doesn't, we'll hold his feet to the flames. If he does, we'll praise him. We are literally non-partisan here. Look, obviously I want Brexit to succeed, but if he's going to do a crap job with it, we're going to call him out, regardless of what party politics he's on. Experts have looked closely at the Conservative membership and found it to be entirely unrepresentative of the general population based on gender, wealth, ethnics, and their hardline attitudes against Brussels. In other words, this party is not conforming to our identity politics. Researchers confirmed that 70% of the party members are male. Oh no. And 97% are white British. So who would have thought? White British males voting for a white British man. Yes, because they're white and they're British, and they want white Britain to be white Britain. That's not a bad thing. I don't start a campaign to invade South America or South Africa with white men, do I? In fact, last time that happened, you guys kind of got a little upset about it, didn't you, lefties? Hey? The whole colonization of Africa? But it seems to be completely fine when it's the other way around. The average age is 57, and though over 40% of the group is aged 65 or above. Who cares? They're parliament members. Who cares? There's 160,000 of them. 40% still means there's roughly, 80,000 to 90,000 that out of 160 that weren't over the age of 65. And sorry, but if the party is overwhelmingly male, then women just have to get good. Right? I'm sorry, I'm not conforming to your identity politics. Stick it up your rear. Members concerned in the southern half of the country, with 6 out of 10 living in East London, East England, London, and Southeast and Southwest. 6 out of 10 are living in Eastern England, Southeast and East and Southwest, and London itself. Isn't that the, I don't know, 6 out of 10th of the area of London? Isn't that the vast majority of the populated areas in the UK? I wonder why the vast majority or the vast populated areas would have the most amount of party members. I'll get back to you on that one. But yeah, some 86% of them fall into the ABC1 category, used by researchers to describe the top social grade. Politics professor Tim Bartlett told metro.com.uk, the average member will be a man in his late 50s with white British, well living in the south of England and comfy off. They are certainly more comfortable off than the most average person, and certainly not representative in terms of ethnicity. I don't care about your race cards. I don't care about your identity politics. At the end of the day, yeah, look, if they're rich class and they're not representing the workers, they will be screwed over in the election. It is entirely possible that they will look after their better interests. And we will call them out for that when that happens. But at the end of the day, this whole fear campaign of, oh my God, the white British male is taking over the Tory Conservative Party. It's like they're a bunch of conservatives. In the UK, some 15% people come from ethnic majority backgrounds. And how's that working out for London right now, which is the vast majority of them? Where only 3% of those in the Conservative Party do. Oh my God, the identity politics is just not working for us anymore. Professor Bale from Queen Mary University, and if you ever want a university not to go to, probably that's a start, said there has been a hardening of attitudes against the EU by grassroots Tories in the last few years. In 2016, 80% of Tory members voted to leave, and now 2/3 want to exit the bloc without a deal. Some 90% would oppose the second referendum on people's vote on the exact terms of our exit, scheduled for October 31st. First, they wanted a vote again on whether we should go or not. And then we had that whole election sort of, well, it wasn't really an election, but yeah, the EU Parliament voting a few months ago, and the overwhelming majority of them were hardliners, people on both sides. But the vast majority were people like, for example, Brexit won like 30-something seats. Right? The vast majority of the people in the UK voted for the EU Parliament members that want to leave the EU. Somehow, I don't think your second referendum on Brexit is going to go the way you think it is. We literally had a similar situation just before. And how did that go for your EU Parliament? Oh, wait. That's right. I remember. Overwhelming majority voted for parties that were pro-exit. So, yeah. Surveys show only a quarter of the voters would leave the EU without a deal, but 2/3 of the party members prefer the option of no deal. We had Theresa May saying no deal is better than a bad deal. Then you had celebrity politicians like Jacob Rees-Mogg and Boris Johnson talking about no deal. That has definitely had an impact on the views of the Conservative Party members. Look, at the end of the day, what's my deal on this? What's my view on this whole deal, no deal sort of thing? If the EU won't let you leave, flip the table and walk out. The UK is in a far better situation to go through and to bring the EU to the table than the other way around. The EU needs the UK. The UK does not need the EU. Trade agreements and all that sort of excuses, they worked long before the EU came into power, or before people started talking about the EU. In fact, the main reason why people supported the EU originally was like free movement and stuff like that, which now we know is a code word for mass immigration. Like my parents, for example. I spoke to them about the EU, right? And they were all, the EU is great. And I asked them why. And they said because you can travel anywhere with one passport and without having to get visas and shit like that. That was literally the only reason why the EU was great, was free movement, which is code for mass immigration. So, there's that. Mind you, they've since come back from France and their views on mass immigration have slightly changed towards my hardline thinking of, fuck off, we're full. But, funny how you sort of start exploring the rest of the world and you start realizing the damage that mass immigration has caused, and all of a sudden you start thinking that, hang on, maybe my son might have been correct when he said that this mass immigration is a bad idea. Who would have thought? But like I say, look, at the end of the day, obviously the Metro is just losing their shit because at the end of the day, Boris Johnson has won. This is bad for them and their whole stall out Brexit. Maybe you get another referendum because he's going to go through and he's going to leave the EU, whether they like it or not. And this is something that he has actually said in an interview or in a video. People were talking to him about his stance on the EU, and let me see if I can find it. I found a video that explains his plan. I'm not sure what their view is, just their political leanings and stuff like that. But let's go through and let's watch this together, and you can get an idea of possibly. Just keep in mind, I don't know what their political views are. So they could be left, they could be right, they could be centrist. So who doesn't know? So let's go through and talk about. Or watch this.
And seeing what exactly his plan is. So during a recent spate of media interviews, Johnson did an interview with Talk Radio, where he gave his 3-tier Brexit plan, with plan A, B and C. If plan A doesn't work, then it comes in plan B. And if plan B doesn't work, then yeah, you guessed it, plan C. Well, plan A is to renegotiate the withdrawal agreement, and this time get rid of the backstop. This isn't surprising, as pretty much all of the candidates for Prime Minister propose a variation of this plan. That's because, and in case you missed it, Brexiteers hate the backstop. That's because it keeps the UK in a single customs territory with the EU, and commits to level playing field regulations across a range of sectors, with no unilateral means of getting out. They're worried that if no trade deal is agreed, then the UK will be stuck in a backstop indefinitely, which means no new trade deals with the US or anyone else. The EU insists on the backstop because it prevents any infrastructure on the Irish border and protects the integrity of the single market, even if the UK and EU can't agree on anything. The EU has been pretty clear that they don't.
So if they can't agree on anything, they can't agree on a trade, what is the UK going to do if it can't then go through and deal with the US or Australia, for example? So I think this backstop is a bad idea.
Don't plan on reopening the withdrawal agreement, let alone getting rid of the backstop. And Johnson hasn't exactly explained how he's going to get them to change their mind and renegotiate it. So it's fair to say that there's a pretty decent chance that this plan won't end up working, and Johnson will be forced into Plan B. Plan B is to go for a no deal, but there's a catch. Johnson proposes using Article 24 of the General Agreement on Trade and Tariff, or GATT, to create an interim period during which a free trade deal can be agreed. GATT is sort of the founding legislation of the World Trade Organization, hence why it's occasionally referred to as WTO Article 24. Anyway, Johnson claims that such a free trade deal could be sorted out without border infrastructure, and according to him there's abundant technical fixes. If you want to know more about that, go and check out our video on border technology, there'll be a link down below. Anyway, GATT24 has popped up a number of times in the...
See, the question I have is, why do they not want border infrastructure? When they say border infrastructure, what they're actually talking about there is they're actually talking about border security. They're talking about checkpoints. They're talking about fences and whatnot, right? So, for example, and this is where they kind of give it away here, right? The Brexit does not want any of this. And Boris Johnson's plan is, okay, we don't necessarily need to build a wall, for example. We can use high-tech surveillance to monitor the situation. Now, my question is, why does the EU not want a wall? Because it might stop mass immigration.
Anyway, GATT24 has popped up a number of times in the past 3 years as a potential silver bullet to no-deal issues, and at one time or another has been advocated by Jacob Rees-Mogg, Nigel Farage, and now Boris Johnson. Sorry for yet more promos, but we've done a video on this too, which goes into much more detail. So if you'd like a proper run through of what Article 24 is and whether it will work, go and watch that video, because honestly, we don't have time to run through all that now. If you can't be bothered doing that, then here's a brief explainer. GATT24 basically allows countries which are in the process of sorting out a trade deal to trade without tariffs while they finalise their trade deal. This is something that would otherwise violate the World Trade Organization's Most Favoured Nation principle. The Most Favoured Nation principle states that any WTO member has to apply the same tariffs to all other WTO members, unless they have some sort of bespoke deal with the nation. GATT24 therefore allows you to break that principle and trade tariff-free as long as you and the other country are nearly at a deal. To implement GATT24, both parties have to come up with and agree to a plan of implementation, which then has to be sent over to the World Trade Organization, where it's reviewed by all of the WTO member states. This means that when we bring it back to Brexit, GATT24 can't be triggered by the UK alone. It needs the EU to agree to it as well. It also means that any proposal will be subject to legally binding recommendations by all of the other WTO members. Even if you put that aside, the EU is still really unlikely to agree to any interim agreement. Just think about it for a second. If the EU refuses Plan A, not budging on the withdrawal agreement, not scrapping the backstop, and forcing Johnson and the UK into resorting to GATT24, why would they suddenly buckle and agree to GATT24's interim agreement, which would essentially be the transition phase of the withdrawal agreement without the backstop they want so badly? Put simply, why would the UK and EU be able to do a deal based on some obscure piece of WTO legislation that's literally never been used before, when they can't do a deal on their own terms? This is why as soon as Plan B came out, it was rubbished by Mark Carney. For those of you who don't know, Carney is the governor of the Bank of England. And a few days after Johnson laid out his
The Bank of England. I wonder who he represents.
plan, Carney made a rare intervention to say that GATT24 only applies if there's an agreement, and not in the case of a no deal, when there's been no agreement. Carney put it very simply when he spoke to the BBC, saying that GATT24 applies if you have an agreement, not if you've decided not
The BBC, who are universally renowned for being non-partisan, of course,
to have an agreement, or have been unable to come to an agreement. Carney has long been against the idea of the UK leaving the EU without a deal, citing the economic damage that he sees such an outcome leading to. He said that up to 150,000 British businesses didn't have the paperwork needed to export to the EU if a no deal happens, which means that only 40% of British businesses are properly prepared. He also said that businesses importing goods from the EU only have a very short-term level of preparation, with stockpiles which would only last weeks. Johnson has since hit back at Carney's.
That sounds like a lot of fear-mongering to me. If I ran a British business, for example, and I did not have the paperwork done, and like Brexit was voted on how many years ago now? And all of a sudden, what? They haven't gone through and done their paperwork? Like, oh my god, the country seems to be heading in a Brexit situation. I need paperwork done so that I can go through and export to the EU. I might still delay that and not get that done because I want to cripple my business. Is that what they're expecting us to believe? Sounds a lot like BS to me.
Core claim about GATT. Johnson has admitted that GATT24 does require a bilateral agreement, but has insisted that the EU might agree to it. This came out in a radio interview where Johnson said that Carney was right that there had to be an agreement on both sides, but that he was wrong to say it's not an option. Johnson went on to say that Article 24 made it perfectly clear that two countries that are in the process of beginning a free trade agreement may protract their existing arrangements until such time they've completed a new free trade agreement. But this has never been tested before, and it's unclear if the EU will cooperate, and how far through the process of getting a deal sorted you'd have to be for the World Trade Organization to accept it. Anyway, for a better explainer on that whole topic, it's worth checking out our other video, and it's not even a long one. Let's say that Plan B also fails, then Johnson will need to resort to Plan C. Plan C is to go for a straight out no deal, and Johnson said that he'll withhold the $39 billion that the UK owes the EU to try and use it as leverage to force the EU to come back to the table with a better offer, presumably hoping they'll agree to his ideal solution, a version of the withdrawal agreement without the backstop. This Plan C no-deal approach would probably preclude the possibility of any bilateral agreements between the UK and EU to mitigate the damage, and so both would have to rely on unilateral measures to keep everything flowing smoothly. And people of all political stripes have agreed that a no-deal like this could get pretty messy. At this point, it's probably worth taking a look at that infamous £39 billion, and whether or not Johnson, or any other Brexiteer for that matter, is allowed to withhold it. Well, the divorce bill, as it's come to be known, is made up of basically two parts. The UK's contributions to the EU's budget up until 2020, and the longer-term commitments to stuff like pensions and infrastructure projects. Most of it would end up being paid by 2020, but some of the financial commitments go all the way forward to 2064. The sum of money owed is where the £39 billion figure comes from. It's not clear whether or not the UK is legally obliged to pay the EU this £39 billion, because the financial obligations to the EU are enshrined in European Union law, which...
If you're not a part of the EU, why would you keep paying? Right? That £39 billion, by the way, what could that do for the NHS? Or what could that do for infrastructure? I actually like this no deal Brexit.
Becomes irrelevant for the UK once they leave the EU. However, like most legal stuff, it's not that simple. And the fact that the UK is committed to paying the sum in more recent joint reports might mean they end up having to. The European Union could even take the case to the International Court of Justice. But none of us at TLDR are lawyers, so we're not going to anticipate the final verdict or the legality of it all. Regardless of whether it's legal or not, withholding £39 billion might not be a good idea. It's not a good look for a state to be seen as reneging on its existing financial commitments.
No, that financial commitment was that you would be in the EU until 2064. If you're no longer in the EU until 2064, then you're not reneging on the deal, are you? It's like, hey darling, I'm going to marry you until 2064, and every year I will give you an X amount of money. But since then, we're getting divorced, so I'm not going to keep paying your ass. Kind of like this no Brexit deal more than I ever did.
It could even affect the UK's credit rating if investors begin to doubt whether or not the UK can be trusted to pay back its debts. Not to get too into details of the credit rating, but a poorer rating would basically mean that the UK would have to offer steeper interest rates to possible investors, which wouldn't be great for the economy. However, there's an even more fundamental issue with falling back onto Plan C. Parliament has made it clear that they don't want a no deal, and it's not clear how the Prime Minister can force through
No, that's not true, because we literally have an article here that actually debunks that by saying... Here we go. 80% of Tory members voted to leave, and now 2/3 want to exit the bloc without a deal. So 2/3 want to exit without a deal, right? So what did he say?
Parliament has made it clear that they don't want a no deal, and it's not clear.
But 2/3 want to leave without a deal. Oh, right, that's right. He's talking about Parliament, which is everybody. Everybody doesn't want the EU to leave. Oh my God. Oh, who would have thought? Who cares? Why don't we care what the Tory members want? Tory members, 2/3 want to exit without a deal. And that's the important thing. This is obviously a left-wing YouTube channel.
How the Prime Minister can force through a no deal without doing something drastic, like, say, proroguing Parliament. Prorogation is basically the ending of a parliamentary session, and refers to the time between the end of a parliamentary session and the beginning of the next one. Essentially, the plan here is that if the current Parliament won't approve a no deal, the Prime Minister could then just suspend Parliament and leave it in this prorogued state until the October 31st deadline passes, and then bring them back when it's too late for them to stop anything. Again, there's far too much to cover here, so we've done a whole nother video on that topic.
Alright, so you get the idea. This is the general idea of what's going on. Look, at the end of the day, I like option 1 and I like option 3. I don't think option 2 will actually work. But yes, I think a country should have every right to put up border security. And I find it very, very interesting that the one thing the EU wants is open borders. So they can flood the UK with mass immigration still, maybe. And maybe do it sneakily like the US border, for example. It's weird that the UK and the US are seemingly want to secure their borders, but they're getting interference from outside parties that want them to have open borders. It's weird. But yeah, but like I say, look, at the end of the day, guys, obviously that's going on. Look, the Boris Johnson thing, my personal view, I think it's a good thing. I think it's a step in the right direction. Whether or not he will deliver, we'll have to wait to see. But I think he's going to be doing a better job than Theresa May. As for him winning, congratulations to Boris Johnson. I hope you do a really, really good job. If you don't, we're going to hold your feet to the fire. And apart from that, guys, let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section below. What are your thoughts on Boris Johnson? Do you think he's going to do a good job? Do you think he's going to do a bad job? Let me know in that comment section. Apart from that, obviously the video has been helpful. Please smack that like button if you're new to the channel. Welcome and subscribe. And apart from that, the UK, congratulations. Happy Boris Johnson Day. Have a great day, everybody. Bye.